Hey guys, my name is Jim. This is Rocco. We're going to be talking to you about iOS development, how to do it right, how to do it professionally. We're going to introduce you to a lot of tools and just different devices to make making your app a lot easier and making your workflow a lot simpler. So Rocco's going to first talk to you about storyboards for Alexa.
All right, awesome. So nice to see you all today. Storyboards are something that Apple recently introduced, and I believe in Xcode 4 or 5. The idea is that it's a graphical interface for designing views instead of doing it in code. On its face, it makes a lot of sense. You know, like when you're allocating a view and you're supposed to put it on screen, it's a lot easier to just drag it than to align it with pixels. Unfortunately, storyboards don't work very well. They all conform to something called auto layout. This means that when you're designing an app for an iPhone 5, an iPhone 6, an iPhone 6 Plus, and you put a view in the middle of the screen, it's going to try and move that view to wherever it thinks that you want it versus where you actually want it. So it can be great for setting up really quick things, demos, MVPs and stuff, but in actual production, you're going to find that your views don't actually line up the way that you want to. It's going to be really finicky, and it can often be impossible to override. The solution, don't use them. They're really terrible. They're slow. They take a lot longer to compile and to run. They look really confusing, as you're about to see. This is what a full implementation of a storyboard looks like, and that's a clean one. Storyboards are terrible. Don't use them. Just allocate everything in code. Old-fashioned. When you set up an app, instead of making a root view controller and a storyboard, the only thing that you're going to do is go to your application delegate. This is the first thing that gets instantiated that you have access to. There's a function there called application did finish launching. This is where you're going to set up all the view controllers that your entire app uses. And then if you do that, you can set up custom animations to switch between each one and manage your application to the lowest level.
So what Rocco was talking about earlier is that storyboards tend to try to manage auto layout for you. And auto layout's great. It's the thing that keeps it so that your apps look great on a 6 Plus, 6, 5, 5S, 4S, all the way through. However, when a storyboard implements it, it's not necessarily going to be that clean, as we've seen with when you're trying to compile an app with a storyboard in it. It takes a long time. So you can write that code yourself, and this is basically what it looks like. This is essentially how to make constraints programmatically in order to get rid of the need for a storyboard. Obviously, it doesn't give you the visual, but this is going to be a much cleaner version. And this implementation that you see here is actually done using Masonry, which is a project on it that has a GitHub that we've linked to the resources. And it's a library that's going to allow you to write even cleaner auto layout code that's super readable. Like with this one, you can specifically see, hey, we're going to be making constraints, and we're going to make the constraints with these preferences or settings, and that's it. That is the whole constraint there. And this is all one line of code, so the whole block there is 2 lines of code for you. So how are you going to use that Masonry package if you have to, include that code? Well, you're going to use CocoaPods. CocoaPods is a way for you to manage your libraries integrated into your product, into your project, it uses a Ruby backend to kind of allow you to super easily install these projects. They're called pods. So simply installing CocoaPods, one line, sudo gem install CocoaPods, done. You have CocoaPods. Now you make your pod file inside of your project folder, and you hit pod install, and you're done. Everything that's in your pod file, just like this, gets installed and implemented into your project, and you're all set. So we can see with this simple pod file, we're saying, hey, CocoaPods, we're going to be using iOS 8, so why don't you go grab AF Networking, which is a framework that allows you to do data communication super efficiently and cleanly. SD Web Image for loading images, all that kind of stuff. Facebook SDK as a whole, Realm, which is local databases. That's all done super quick. You don't have to do anything and download them for you. So this kind of thing is similar to Maven if you've ever used that. I think this is even cleaner. Let's see. So that pod file is actually MeNext current pod file right now.
Yeah, one real quick note on CocoaPods, if you're going to use them, you're required to use a workspace, not a project. project is embedded within a workspace. The only thing a workspace means is that you can use any number of projects that are compiled successfully for one application. It's super simple. All you have to do is just go File, Create New Workspace, and then add your existing project, CocoaPods will do the rest. In terms of documentation, fragment marks are this really cool thing that I've only ever seen in iOS, or Objective C. What it allows you to do is when you look at a drop-down list of any given class, you're going to see a list of all your functions. What fragment marks do is they create bold separators between different sections of functions, allow you to basically separate your class in a very nice, clean, organized fashion. So for example, you might have a section of fragment mark called initializers. We have a couple of different init methods. Then you might have a section called accessors, where you're simply returning different variables. And then you might have one called server functions, where you're interacting with the server somewhere. It's just a very clean, simple, and easy way to organize your code. Literally all you have to do is type hashtag pragma space mark and then a dash and then name your section whatever you want. In addition to that, you can also search for sections throughout the entire scope of the project. So if you want to get a list, let's say you need to change the endpoint or the way that you're pulling some sort of action to a server, all you have to do, if you named all of your server actions is to do a query for server actions, and you're just going to see a group of all the functions that apply to that. Additionally, there's a third-party library called Syncs. This thing's awesome. What it does is it keeps your project library in Xcode matched to the library that you have on disk. So what Xcode does when you create or import a file, it just dumps it in one folder, right? So if you go to the physical folder on disk, you're going to see just one list of a bunch of files versus the organized folders and groups that you have in your Xcode Project Navigator. All Syncs does is keep these linked together. Aside from that, you guys are all programmers, you know how to document code, please just do so. Data storage. So if you want to store data on the device, there's three basic options that exist out there today. There's Realm, Mantle, and Core Data. Core Data is Apple's default implementation. If you ask an Apple employee what you should use, his first answer is going to be Core Data. You go to Apple's website and you look up how to store information on a device, you're going to see Core Data, unless you're looking at like a plist, but that's mainly just used for preferences, Boolean values, simple strings, that kind of thing. What we're talking about here are really more database-like functions. The two that exist outside of Core Data are Realm and Mantle. Core Data is highlighted right up there because it's terrible, much like many of the other default Apple implementations. It's really slow, it's hard to set up, it requires a persistent store, and the encryption is bad. That being said, you're also super limited to the types of data that you can store. So what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up storing a lot of data, but then converting all of it, whatever you want to query it. It's really terrible. Instead, I suggest you use something like Realm. Mantle is also another good alternative. Both of them are sort of competing for the same space right now. They both offer very similar features. I happen to prefer Realm. I know some people happen to prefer Mantle. I think Realm's going to win. That's my personal preference. Realm's awesome. Literally the only thing that you have to do in order to set it up is to say, Realm, default Realm, add these objects, subtract these objects. The only requirement of any object be stored in Realm is that it be a subclass of RML object. So you can store pretty much whatever you want, whether that be images, URLs, dates, numbers, all these things that you can't do in a core data implementation without either serializing them or merging them. And it's also a CocoaPod, so it's super easy to just install, drop in.
So when you're managing data that's not going into a database, and when you're managing things like maybe a shared method that you need to be using in multiple view controllers, you should be doing that via a singleton. Singletons, which is just a class which can only be created once as something that's taken care of for you by Apple's dispatcher, which is shown here in our little code snippet. Singletons are really great at how Apple does everything, and that's how you should also be doing it. So if you need some sort of a manager, most of the time you're going to call a manager, and then you're going to call a class function of the manager to get the manager. And you can get that from any view controller. So why not make your own for your own shared functions? This is how you do sort of a shared manager. This is actually the shared init for the shared data that's actually used in Unix. So that tiny block of code basically just says, hey, this class is something that we can only generate once. Once it's generated, we're only going to pass the pointer to the first one. That keeps it so that you only have one manager for your entire project, no matter what's running, what's going on. So something like this will allow you to not only share methods, but also share things like quick data between different controllers, something that's not so comprehensive that you can put it in a database. Using a singleton as your data manager is the cleanest way to share things between view controllers without having to always have to pass it. You don't even have to pass the data manager between view controller A and view controller B. It actually will just get itself by calling this class method. You just include it and say, share data, done. That's it. You now have the singleton, you have the reference, you don't have to worry about it. Going from passing things between view controllers to this was like night and day. Everything was so much cleaner from next, and it will be just as clean for your project. Dispatch also makes things thread safe. So what this code snippet does on top of what I've already said is it also makes it thread safe. So no matter what's going on thread-wise in the project, it's always going to give you a clean reference.
So I'm sure many of you have heard of MVC. It's a standard way of developing any application called model view controller. The idea is that you have a view controller that controls anything that you see on screen. So whether that be a button, a text field, whatever. It's in charge of instantiating those things, putting them on screen properly, and then moving them around. That connects with a model, a data source of some kind, whether that be a realm database or a server or something else. The model gives the data to the view controller manipulates it so that the user sees what's necessary on screen. It's pretty efficient. It's way more efficient than doing everything inside one class's view controller. The reason it's way more efficient is because it does things on two separate threads. One thread for controlling data management and one thread for controlling UI management. MVVM is a new method that's better than MVC that ironically came out of Microsoft policies. The idea behind MVVM is we split it instead of two, but now into 3 parts. So you're going to have a view controller or a view that handles everything in the UI, just like the view controller did before. However, this view controller is no longer responsible for data manipulation or any sort of algorithmic calculations. So let's say you have a set of data and you need to do either some simple math, some hard math, maybe some ML stuff, who knows. But you need to modify that data, loop through it, query something. That's all going to be done in the view model, right? And then finally that data is going to be stored query in the final model. The second advantage to doing MVVM comes from something called reactive COCO, or just linking things together. The idea behind reactive COCO is if I have a text field, and that text field is supposed to display a certain string, I can link them together. That way, whenever I change the string, the text field is changed automatically. And so because you can install reactive COCO pods, and the entire thing is a singleton, as we've mentioned before, all three of those things are done on separate threads. So now instead of waiting for a UI to display before we can do calculations, we can actually do that at the exact same time. So we have all three different types of processes being run concurrently for maximum efficiency. It's a little confusing. I believe in the slides at the end we include some resources that sort of go through a really detailed explanation of how to set it up. I know if you're used to MVC before, it's really hard to switch over. It's just sort of hard to get a grip on it. You'll end up putting functions in the wrong places. You'll get kind of frustrated. Once you get a hang of it, your whole application is going to run a lot faster.
So a lot of you guys want to make these iOS apps, right? And the hardest part tends to be, how do I make it look not awful? Maybe not even good, just not awful. And to start, we can say, well, let's help you get it not awful. And even with these programs, you can make it look pretty good, even with a very small, dedicated amount of time. So to generate assets, you can use programs like Sketch with tutorials from Sketchcast, and there are many other different ones online that you can check out. Sketch is essentially shrunk down Photoshop. Sketch is essentially shrunk down Photoshop specifically for designing web and UI. So it's not quite as powerful, but it's super quick and easy. You also can take things that you design in Sketch and using an app called Bezier code convert it directly into Objective-C. So you take your vectors and immediately make it programmatically displayed on your user interface. So with that kind of workflow, you go from, well, now I've got to wait for someone to design me the vector, and then I've got to, because, maybe from Photoshop, and then you take it and you say, okay, I can design my vector super quickly, and then I can convert it to Objective-C and implement it right away. It takes the hurt out of the process. I know certainly for myself, it's been a lot nicer. So then animation comes along, and it's like, well, you thought that was easy. Well, got some bad news. Animation's hard, and it is hard. Animation is super hard. If anybody tells you otherwise, they're wrong. But you can make it a little bit easier by using Pop by Facebook, which is a code pod you can go and grab, or Chords Core, which is a program much like Sketch, which makes animation a little bit simpler and allows you to have visual control over what's going on. I definitely recommend checking these out. We're going to provide links to some things in the end, but Sketch and Chords Core and Pop, those are super easy to Google and get results. So these are the resources and packages that I've been mentioning this whole time. So on the left, we've got some resources for just learning these things. Everything from just limited tutorials, which are super easily smart people for that thing, all to lots of articles and blogs by people who are super smart and know what they're talking about for iOS. On the right-hand side, we've got things like Alcatraz, which is a package manager for Xcode, which allows you to implement things like color schemes or maybe autocomplete for different things, or changing it so that when you type a color, it immediately displays the color next to the code so that you can see what you're doing. Stuff like that. All doable through Alcatraz, which is a super simple package manager. Realm, Sinks, Masonry, and Reactive Cocoa, all which were mentioned. Here's links for you. We're going to send these out to the list. Definitely recommend checking them out. Specifically, if we want to talk about resources real quick, we've got Design plus Code. That's a really, really great, it's actually a book now, I believe, too.
It's a book and a community.
Yeah, it's just a really great resource for design sort of help and resources and references and stuff like that. Definitely check these out if you're looking to do iOS even in the slightest.
Yeah, so I got a couple flip notes to make about these actually. So if there's 3 things that you all want to take out of this today, I would like to keep 1, don't use storyboards ever. 2, use CocoaPods all the time, especially for MVCs and proof of concepts kind of stuff. It's a lot easier to just drop in other people's work and just try to figure out something worth pursuing. And 3, set up Xcode in a fashion that works for you before you really start to work. It's going to save you a lot of time. If you go into the preferences, you can set key bindings for literally anything that you want to do. If you click Command-Shift-O, you can type in the name of the file you want to navigate to and it'll go there. Type in Command-Shift-Up and down and switch between header and main files. And if you install Alcatraz, you can enable a bunch of plugins that will make your entire workflow faster. Literally, I would develop apps at least 5 times slower if it wasn't for setting up my development the way I liked it before I started. And if you do all 3 of those things, your life as an iOS developer is going to be hugely improved. Also, all that being said, I am not actually a member of RCOS right now. I did it for 2 years. I'm working on way too many things to contribute to this at the moment. That being said, I'm in the Slack group. If you have any questions about this kind of stuff, I've been developing for iOS for over 4 years now. I've been developing for OS X for about 3. Many of the technologies that are on the screen I've been using since the day that they came out. So if you need help beyond this brief overview, or if you have trouble understanding anything, please just post it in the iOS Slack group or shoot me a private message. My name is my full name, Rocket Up, I'm more than happy to help you out.
Awesome, thanks guys.